when Daggerheart came out, right, I started doing some streams, talking about the game, sharing my own kind of individual perspective on the game and my advice for people who are playing it and running it or designing things for it. And then after Gen Con, I was doing more stuff and I started sharing things from Bastion of Hope, the campaign frame that I wrote. And last year had a lot of things, right? There were some very bad things last year and some very good things, right? Daggerheart, very good thing for me and hopefully for a lot of you. A thing I learned while designing for Daggerheart for the the community gaming license is that there's parts of the project management and publisher work to make TTRPG projects that are especially hard for me. It's more so a thing I learned in economics is the idea of economies of scale, right? If factory 1 can make 100 umbrellas in an hour and factory 2 can make 60 umbrellas in an hour, and then but those two umbrella companies have the same costs, right? It's more efficient to make your umbrellas with company 1, but if company 2 with that same equipment can make, let's say instead of umbrellas, let's say they can make rakes. They can make 80 rakes an hour, and then the first factory can only make 30 rakes an hour. Economies of scale would say it's best for factory A to make umbrellas and factory B to make rakes. The idea that I take away from that is the idea that different people have different efficiencies and different kind of talents. And by talent, I mean developed skills and aptitudes, right? Aptitudes that are realized. Not like, oh, they were always talented and they didn't have to do any work. No, like lots of work. Where my efficiencies of scale lie are in origination, ideation, writing, some in editing, and I'm pretty good at like some mentoring kinds of stuff because I've been a teacher in a lot of different ways. I've taught tango, I've taught fencing, I've taught web design, I've taught writing. There's probably other things, right? Games, of course, right? Teaching people lots of games. But what I don't have that competitive advantage in, and in fact really feel the difference in, is managing schedules and productions, like spreadsheets and a lot of that stuff that's super important, but it's different than write a bunch of adversaries and make them really good. Hello, Jota and DM Rawlings. Thanks for hanging out today. In working on Bastion of Hope and commissioning an artist and working with somebody to do layout and kind of production coordination, that process taught me and showed me all these parts of publishing in the RPG world that are really hard for me. And some delays due to life in the universe and everything meant that Bastion of Hope is not out yet, though keeping fingers crossed, it looks like things may resolve and be able to move forward pretty soon with that, so I will hope to not jinx it. Once I realized that it was going to be hard to get Bastion of Hope out the door as early as I wanted, I looked at my big list of Daggerheart-compatible adversaries that I've been developing, and I said, well, this is a small book, right? There's 30-something of them here. And so I started working on getting that to publication with a different approach, where I was more hands-on and specific in terms of what I was asking for and being more forthcoming with my expectations so that people knew what I was asking for. Not just like me being more demanding, but being clear about what I am actually hoping for so that everybody's on the same page. Hello, Libraci. Thank you for joining. Welcome to your first time. So right now I'm talking about the process of publishing Menagerie of Mayhem, which is my first Daggerheart-compatible adversary book, which came out yesterday. So working on Menagerie with specifically layout designers taught me some useful lessons, but even though I did things that I should have done earlier and I've learned and am applying those lessons, some of that stuff is still very hard. But I was able to set myself up for a bit of an easier time, and the process of making Menagerie was much easier in some ways because I was using stock art, right? I went and purchased the stock art collection from Tanya Herrero. I'm going to link this here to try and get Tanya as much business as I possibly can, right? So I picked up this stock art collection and said, okay, great. These pieces fit adversaries I've already created, and I can create some new adversaries that will fit the rest of this art. And then I'll have a short book that has 8 pieces of really high quality art. I can use one of those for the cover, and then that will let me kind of get started, get something to market pretty quickly. Junk Rabbit asks, are there any specific lessons about working with layout artists? I'm reaching out to a few next month to create a style guide for my adventure. Yeah, so I had self-published fiction before, and doing layout for fiction and doing layout for RPGs is very different because almost all works of fiction are laid out. So for ebook, they're laid out just like as HTML in a somewhat simpler fashion. A lot of digital RPG books are just laid out as PDFs instead of as EPUBs or MOBIs. The MOBI format isn't as prominent anymore. Too in the weeds. But doing layout for RPG works, right? There's more art. There's a higher expectation of like kind of color stuff on the pages. Specific lessons that I learned were, one, setting, or like I knew what I wanted the pages to kind of look like when they were done, right? I wanted to be pretty similar to, and in a usable fashion, close to the way that adversaries are listed in the SRD, the system resource document or reference document. I don't remember which R they use off the top of my head right now, where we have the specific blocks and things are arranged in a way. And I wanted to be able to get 2 stat blocks per page everywhere that there wasn't a piece of art. Because if there's a piece of art, then there can be the 1 stat block that goes with it. What I didn't do that I might want to do moving forward is kind of just create a flat plan myself of here are the pieces that I have, and here's how they might fit on pages, so that I would know which pieces are going to be better for getting art. Like, oh, okay, if I have a piece of art for this stat block, how can I arrange things so that it can be on a page on its own, and that doesn't create crowding or too much white space somewhere else in the layout flow of this book. And so a lot of this type of lesson I learned working with Irving, who publishes as Jellyfish Lines, and going through a initial production kind of process with Irving gave me a clearer sense of how I would want to approach a more polished layout to kind of present itself and be able to put its best foot forward in the market, so that the first bigger thing that I put out really looked as professional as I could make it in terms of being comparable to a core rulebook or like a prominent supplement. And for that, I reached out to Luna P. Luna is known as a graphic designer and brand designer, or like branding designer, and does layout for books. Conveniently, although I had heard of Luna, Carlos Cisco, who was also an additional designer on Daggerheart, had worked with Luna on Pistol Heart, the Western fantasy supplement series that he is working on and publishing. And the first one of that is already out, and it's very cool. And especially the layout and graphic design is great. So that is Luna. And let me get a link there. Let's just go and let's make lots of work for all of the lovely people. In just a second, I'm queuing something else up so that I can credit everybody. So I approached Luna and was able to more clearly express, this is what I want. Here are comparable works that I think are in the same territory. And here is my objective with this book. And working with Luna was great. I look forward to working with Luna again in the future. I wish Luna lots of work, lots of good work. Hopefully, Luna will not be so busy that it will be hard for me to be able to work with Luna. But sometimes this happens. You find somebody who's amazing. They do amazing work. And because they are amazing, more and more people want to work with them. And then they become very busy. This is an okay problem to have, right? Lots of people reached out to want to work with me after the Dungeons of Drakkenheim Daggerheart campaign guide crowdfunding campaign, right? After that project was announced. And people were like, oh, wait, who's this Mike, right? They may have not necessarily known who I was kind of within the Daggerheart world beforehand. Hello, Adventure Lies Ahead. I can see your text and welcome. Thank you for following the channel earlier this week. So working with Luna was great. That came out really well. The other person I want to shout out here is Andrew Bowman, who is a game designer as well as being a graphic designer and artist. And I had made a very basic version of a cover, and Andrew was very nice and spent a few minutes whipping up a much, much, much better version of the cover, which is what I'm using. And then to be complete, here is contact info for Irving. Irving is currently crowdfunding I think a physical edition of his book, his game Townies, which I got to look at and has some very cool stuff to it, especially if you are from like a Rust Belt town in the US Midwest. Go and give that a look. So I had some more experience doing production. I had been able to meet more people, so I had a bigger list of folks to be able to try to reach out to, and several things lined up to be able to create the version that you see. Hello, Alan. Thank you so much. It's always good to be able to build or to publish into an aspect of a game that people are really excited about, right? Obviously, we saw with Incredible Creatures that there was a lot of excitement and energy for adversary design. And so it's fun to be able to point people to other books, right? They pick up Menagerie and they like it, and I say, okay, and you should also check out this and this and this. Just as we develop the third-party kind of creator ecosystem for the game in terms of all these supplements that support the game. Because Menagerie came out first, it was my first experience publishing with Heart of Daggers, which is a Daggerheart-focused online publishing retailer and homebrew community, right? You can post a bunch of stuff there, not for sale, just to kind of share and let other people use, right? So there's homebrew classes and subclasses and adversaries and adventures and lots of stuff there. But you can also sell work there using the CGL. And I had talked some with Matt, who is kind of the lead at Heart of Daggers, because Matt asked me to help judge a homebrew competition late last year, which was fun. So I had already talked some with Matt and got some support in setting the book up there to be able to kind of go on sale when I needed it to. And submitting it through DriveThruRPG was easier than I was worried it was going to be. Because I'd heard from other people that sometimes when they submit something for sale on DriveThruRPG, it takes a couple of business days for it to get processed and published. But for this book, it only took a couple of hours. So I'm grateful to the DriveThruRPG people for that. And only a few hours after Menagerie launched, it had been added to a promotional card that shows up on DriveThruRPG some of the time that shows recent Daggerheart-compatible books, and it spotlights those. And so Menagerie showed up in that on the day that it was released. I have no insider knowledge about how that promotional card is populated, whether it is automatic or there is an editorial element. I am grateful for the support that DriveThru has been giving me so far, and I look forward to doing more business with them, moving forward as we have this stuff. So the book is now out on itch.io, DriveThruRPG, and Heart of Daggers. So just looking at Junkrabbit's note here. Yeah, so Junkrabbit asks about budgeting for art and layout. For Bastion of Hope, I had a level of output that I had a level of output in mind in terms of I want to establish myself as somebody who is delivering material that is very high quality in design and writing, but also in presentation. And that's why I reached out to Sean Ellis, who is the lead concept artist for the Daggerheart core book. I had gotten to work with Sean a little bit during the production of Daggerheart and working on some of the adventures and things that came out after that. And Sean gave me, he was very generous in kind of fitting me in and fitting that work in around other stuff. For Bastion, I laid out more money than I had been thinking I might. But the thing that I kept in mind was that I wanted these first books to make a really good impression and to set a good precedent, both for how I was approaching publishing for kind of Daggerheart-compatible stuff, but also to show other folks hey, this is a bar I think we can hit in a way that is not super unreachable, right? Art is always going to be a question. What are you getting? Who are you going and working with? How big and how many pieces are you going to be commissioning? What I found is that in addition to Tanya's work that's on Itch, there are a number of artists who publish stock art on DriveThruRPG, other folks that publish on Itch, and I found a page that listed a bunch of different people that sell and license stock art. And so I've grabbed some stuff from different places there. As I look toward Menagerie number 2, I'm thinking about how much stock art do I want to use versus how much original art can I commission? Where do I want to allot my art commission budget? Because I've also been commissioning some art for Daggerheart-compatible classes. If you're a patron, you've probably seen the cards and art for the Vinegrasp Warden subclass. I'll let you know that the Oakheart subclass art is going to be coming to Patreon pretty soon as well, because that is now complete. I also commissioned some environment art, right? There's art for Perilous Journey that's on Patreon, because I have environments that I'm working on, because I love environments. I'm in a situation where financially we're not so strapped that I can't invest some money into my business, right? Spend money to make money. By setting a higher floor of production quality, I'm hoping to make this be a work that is appealing and enticing to a broader range of folks who are in the Daggerheart communities. the quality of the stock art from Tanya is really high, and between the pre-work with Irving and then the final layout with Luna and the art and cover design support from Andrew, we ended up with a book that looks really, really good. And I think that has had a big impact on the fact that sales have been really strong, right? Notably beyond what I had set as my let's not get carried away expectations. There are definitely going to be other folks in the RPG world who have a lot more experience doing art direction and commissioning layout artists than I do. What I would recommend for those is do some looking around on YouTube. Think about the RPG books that have been put out that you think have amazing art, or try to follow the artists that you really like, and then see what books they've done stuff in. Figure out what style you want for your book, because some artists are great, but they are not a fit for whatever style you're going for. And think about who works in a style that fits with what you're trying to do. And to find that out, I go and look at artists' portfolios. And what I try to do when I'm looking at portfolios is I try to find places where an artist has done something that fits what I'm looking for more than once. In the same way that if I write something that's kind of a one-off, it might work, but it might be harder for me to replicate it because art is very subjective and people's minds are very individualized. If somebody has worked in the style that I'm looking for more than once, that tells me that they have more familiarity working in that style, and they have some consistency in being able to deliver in that style. That's not to say that you can't find somebody whose portfolio has kind of an edge case that's where that fits what you're looking for. That might just require more research, or it might require talking to them and say, hey, I see this piece. This is really the one that's in the direction of what I'm looking for. Do you have other work that fits? And then you describe why you think that piece is the thing, or is really aligned with what you're looking for. Because they might have stuff that's not published, or they might be trying to develop in that direction. Alan Tucker also has some very good advice. Look for artist names in books and pieces. Reach out to them online, right? They might be too busy or too expensive. A lot of artists, as Alan says, will recommend other artists. They're like, sorry, I'm not available right now, but you should talk to this person and this person, right? Because artists know one another. And much like designers and writers try to support their colleagues, artists will do that a lot of the time as well. And it is something I highly recommend if you are trying to build up a reputation as a publisher, a writer, a designer, an artist, right? Befriend people who are doing what you're doing, because they're going to know what you're going through. And then you're going to be able to work together and send each other work so that you can all kind of rise together in terms of developing a career, gaining status, whatever it is that you want from this experience. Yeah, for DM Rawlings, if you're doing zine length, that is, there's a lot of constraints already. That can be liberatory in that, I only have to fill 20 pages. But depending on what kind of zine it is, right, the more historical kind of punk mode of zines is extremely graphical, right? There's a lot of collage, bricolage, mixed media type elements that are then suggested by the print. For an RPG zine, you probably don't need to be quite that intense, but art does so much work to spark people's imaginations. So it's hard to underestimate the utility of art. And so for Bastion of Hope, we have a lot of art. And I'm very excited because I think that that's going to create a bunch of kind of like vectors of inspiration for people who are engaging with the campaign frame, because there's going to be art that kind of points in a bunch of different directions and sparks lots of ideas. A big thing that I think is really important to note in how Menagerie has done and why I think it has been very successful is the fact that I was already fairly established in Daggerheart creator communities. I already have a track record related to Daggerheart because I was an additional designer on the game and because I worked on these other projects, right? The Quick Start adventure, Marauders of Windfall, which was published last summer during the beta, being a co-writer on the homebrew kit, and having been a contributor on a couple of the campaign frames. I've done streams about adversary design where I did adversary design live and I talked about my philosophy, and people have watched those videos and gone, I like what Mike has to say about adversaries. So when I published Menagerie, I was building on work that I had already done. And that there's a certain degree of, I'm not going to say necessarily cashing in, but I think there's a conversion from the trust and appreciation that people give you when you create for a community and provide resources. And sometimes folks like to take that appreciation and funnel it into or manifest it into financial support, right? Some people become patrons, some people do shout outs, some people try to give you work. What I've found is that a fair number of people, and I'm very grateful for it, have bought the book at least partially because they are grateful to the work that I've done within Daggerheart creator communities. I like to believe that the project itself, right, the work itself is also very valuable. I think it builds on the adversary design approach that you can see in the core rulebook, right? It's just my own particular approach, honed and informed by the process of building the core rulebook, right? But then I'm designing for myself material that I own, and then I'm publishing separate from the Darrington kind of Daggerheart core design process, right? There's separate things, but I'm certainly informed by that process. And I'm excited to see what comes out in Hope and Fear, because there's going to be a bunch of new adversaries that were not shared on the Void, and we're going to see where the design, where those design approaches continue. Junkrabbit, I did not playtest all of the adversaries. I playtested a number of them, and the adversaries that are in there have gone through, I would say, between 3 and 6 revision and editorial passes, where I developed, redeveloped, polished, reevaluated, repolished, because a lot of some of them I had designed as early as last summer. I playtested a fair number of them, and moving forward, I'm going to continue to playtest adversaries as I can to then go into a book. When I get to the point of doing a print collection, I want to have playtested a larger percentage of the books that end up there, and I'm hoping that some folks will give me feedback on the adversaries that are in these individual volumes, in case there are places where more revision is needed. And that's separate from typos and really basic errata stuff. That said, I want to be sure to note here that people who buy the individual adversary collections are going to get a discount on the big collected edition. I haven't figured out exactly how to do that, but you're not going to have to pay full price again when you have bought these other books. Swinginess of low-tier combat. Interesting. So the GM's roles are meant to be swingy as a design expression of design intent, as I understand it, right? The book talks about the GM having a D20 in order to have that swinginess so that there is unpredictability. the GM has fear as an extra lever to increase difficulty when they really need to. And then other times there's the question of, do you respond to what the dice are saying by recontextualizing what's going on and emphasizing the direction that the dice are pushing? But if that is leading to people not being happy about it, then yeah, then certainly that is something that is a consideration. The Umbral Hunting Pack and the Young Thorn Dragon are the ones that I have playtested the most of the adversaries that you'll see in Menagerie number 1. Okay, just going to take a drink here and mute. Okay, so that is about 30 minutes on Menagerie, which that'll make a nice separate video. Does anybody have any other questions about Menagerie of Mayhem from a production or publishing or design standpoint before we move on to the charity game takeaways? I'm going to stream for an hour and a half and get 2 videos out of it. I love it. Okay. If folks come along and you have questions about Menagerie, we might be able to jump back into it. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go over here. Settle on the quantity of adversaries, asks DM Rawlings. When I first started thinking about turning it into a book, I already had a high, somewhere in the high 20s of adversaries. And then I thought about how I might build a book, and my rough outline was 12 adversaries at tier 1, 8 at tier 2, 6 at tier 3, and 4 at tier 4, and that would make 30 adversaries. And then I ended up with 35. So it was a little bit different because I would design an adversary, and then sometimes I would design adversaries to go with them. And that 35 also includes multi-phase adversaries having different phases because it's different stat blocks. If I were doing this again, I might put more time into adversaries earlier in the process and try to get up toward 50 adversaries instead, to have something that was just a bit bigger and have a more even spread of adversaries. Because I've gotten some feedback that folks would rather have fewer tier 1 adversaries because tier 1 is only 1 level. For me, converting adversaries from tier 1 to tier 2, I think can be pretty simple in a lot of situations. But that's something I'm going to keep in mind. So in volume 2, you might see more adversaries at tier 2 than at tier 1. The decision on environments was that I had already designed so many environments that I thought it would work to have separate channels. And because what I was hearing from players and GMs, what the loudest was, we want adversaries. We want adversaries. And I knew that there was excitement about environments, but I wasn't sure whether putting books out that were both at adversaries and environments in one thing might be giving people oh, well, I like 60% of this. Instead of, here's a book that is all adversaries and here is a book that is all environments. I don't know that any one approach is necessarily better than the others, but that was kind of my process.